All right, let's get to the letters to the 7 churches. Now, is chapters 2 and 3, instruction to the 7 churches. Is this instruction only meant for these 7 churches? Of course not, because it's the number 7, and 7 is a number indicating fullness. It's for everyone. These letters encourage every reader to examine themselves and repent before reading this book. They provide Spirit-inspired counsel for the church in every age. As we go through, I want you to be thinking about 2 things. Number 1, less importantly, parish application. Which description most applies to our parish? And how are you called to respond? And number 2, personal application. Which description most applies to you? How are you called to respond? Keep those things in mind as we go through the letters to the 7 churches. Ephesus. The city of Ephesus was a busy port city with lots of foreign trade and lots of foreign gods. It was filled with pagan temples. The people of Ephesus were hardworking. John points out their toil and patient endurance. Some have pointed out that this may have had something to do with their struggle to maintain their harbor. Their port was their livelihood, but river sediment kept pouring silt into the harbor, and it took constant work to keep the port open, which at some point in history they gave up on, and today the city of Ephesus is 6 miles inland. But the Christian community there had some amazing people in it. They had the Apostle John as their bishop, Paul, Timothy, Apollos, the 3 daughters of the Apostle Philip, and possibly Mary Magdalene and possibly Mary, the mother of Jesus, all spent time in Ephesus. John praises the Ephesians for applying their famous work ethic to their spiritual life. The Christian community here, they studied hard. They listened well. They knew their faith tremendously well. And they kicked out false prophets and false teachers. Paul's letter to the Ephesians contains probably his most profound theology. Why? Because the Ephesians were his best students. This is one smart church. This is one spiritually minded church. But Jesus calls them out on one point, and it's not a small one. You have lost the love you had at first. Wow. How about us? We may be great students of the faith, but Jesus has one question for us. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. We may be very good at being right, but are we very good at being loving? If you love me, Jesus says, show me. Show me by loving your neighbor. Repent and do the works you did at first. That's Ephesus. The Nicolaitans were a specific heresy, and it seems that it was one of moral laxity, where they promoted sexual immorality, where they were tolerant of idol worship, and it's thought that maybe this was a heresy of one of the first deacons, Nicholas, the Nicolaitans. It sounds really funny. It makes so much sense when you think about it, though. I mean, I'm thinking, I know people like this, especially online. Jesus is saying, okay, you're really good at arguing the doctrine of the faith. You hate the Nicolaitans. And yeah, it's true, they're wrong. They're spreading wrong ideas. But, oh my goodness, can you please remember to love one another? Then the other 2 you mentioned, Balaam and Jezebel. Those are famous evil figures in the Old Testament. They're not so much, they're not groups or specific heresies, but they're saying, John is saying these people are evil like those people were evil. And I'll describe them specifically when we get there. All right, Smyrna. There were some very anti-Christian Jews in Smyrna who were enraged that many among them were accepting Jesus as the Messiah. So they persecuted the local Christian community. Jesus has great sympathy for the church at Smyrna. He says he knows what they are suffering at the hands of those who, quote, say they are Jews, but are not. He tells them they are going to suffer more, that some of them will be thrown into prison, but they must not be afraid. Be faithful unto death, he says, and I will give you the crown of life. The church at Smyrna must have been tempted to try and make life easier for themselves, to stop preaching the gospel, to stop making converts, to hunker down, to succumb to fear. How about us? Are we driven by fear? Are there times when we avoid speaking about the faith, even when it's appropriate, because we're just afraid to put ourselves out there? We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid of being tagged as the Christian or the Catholic or, the crazy one, the Jesus freak. Are there times we avoid doing the right thing, making the correct moral decision because we're afraid of making life harder for ourselves, when sometimes it's just easier to cut corners? Jesus tells us, do not be afraid. Fearful Christians are racked with inner struggle and bear little fruit. Am I right? Who wants to be a fearful Christian? Nobody. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and self-control. Jesus calls us to live boldly, refuse to listen to fear. Turn the switch off, best you can. That's Smyrna. That's the situation of a lot of Christian churches in the Middle East today. A lot of their members have left. A majority of their members have left. And oftentimes the ones that stay believe they have to hunker down and stop making converts because in many of those countries, making converts is illegal. They could all be arrested. This describes so many churches in the Middle East today. So then in that situation, what are we called to do? Well, Jesus says we're called, as hard as it sounds, to be salt and light, to put ourselves out there. Or, and we see this among Christians too, go somewhere else where you can be salt and light. If it's impossible for you to be salt and light where you are, God might lead you somewhere else. That's something to pray about.
Is it okay?
As a general rule, it is good to go where you can find community, where you are being fed. But then there are times too when we are specifically called to stay put in a tough environment and be salt and light. It is definitely something to pray on in your individual circumstances. So yeah, I want to reiterate, Jesus says though, there's no easy answer. Take up your cross and follow me. Be salt and light, no matter how hard it gets. That's what Jesus tells us to do.
It's going on forever.
Mm-hmm.
We'll continue.
Again, easier said than done.
Always.
But that's the calling. All right. Pergamum. Pergamum was also a city of many pagan temples. The symbol of their city was a snake god. Is it any wonder that Jesus calls this place Satan's throne? Jesus praises the church at Pergamum for standing strong in the face of a city hostile to their beliefs. But, he says, some of them are falling prey to heresies, the teachings of Balaam and the teachings of the Nicolaitans. So, who's Balaam? Balaam was a pagan sorcerer all the way back in the book of Numbers who incited the Israelite men to take Moabite women as wives or concubines and to worship their gods. The Nicolaitans, again, were probably a Gnostic group that was soft on morality and may even have believed that Jesus wasn't even really human. What about us? Do we flirt with New Age or occult beliefs? Do we try to soften the morality of the church? Do we still believe in the sanctity of marriage and the sanctity of human life and the other moral teachings of the church? Do we let false teachings tickle our ears? Think about it. Are there any areas where we're tempted to compromise our beliefs because it's easier that way? That's Pergamum. Any other thoughts on Pergamum?
Rationalization?
Rationalization, exactly. Not just failure to live up to the moral teaching of the church, but going, this isn't right. We don't need to live this way. All right, Thyatira. Thyatira had a huge number of trade guilds. Each guild had its own god, whom all the members were required to worship. This worship often involved sexual immorality and food sacrificed to idols. People needed to belong to these guilds in order to support their families. Jesus has a lot of good things to say about the church in Thyatira. He says they love one another, they serve one another, and they've endured persecution and kept the faith. He even says their love and service just keep getting better and better. But Jesus tells us they have one enormous blind spot. They tolerate a false prophet. This false prophet, the Jezebel, is teaching them that participating in these guilds is fine, that sexual immorality is acceptable, that eating food sacrificed to idols is okay. God understands. You're in a tough spot. Do what you have to do. Jesus comments, repent or be struck dead. Yes.
This is different from the Jezebel when Mary said that the king of Israel.
They're naming it after the same Jezebel. Her name, I'm sure, isn't really Jezebel, but they're saying she's a Jezebel.
Because we're talking hundreds of years, time difference.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it's not only the same person. You can be practically certain she wasn't named Jezebel, even more than the guy in the last church was named Balaam. No, they're just saying that this person is leading other people into sin the same way those historical figures did. Yes.
What? You said they were eating the bread sacrificed. They were Christians.
They were eating food sacrificed to idols. It's kind of an anti-Eucharist. And that was taught against in the book of Acts at the Council of Jerusalem, saying you can't do that.
This is for, who cares if they eat it?
Yeah.
It
And
just seems like
and it's a good question. In one sense, it's like, well, who cares if they eat it? Well,
to kind of stuff in their nose that they...
I can think of two reasons why they shouldn't eat it. One would be public statement. Look, I don't believe in this God. I'm not going to eat this God's food. The other one, I believe in demons. I believe that if you make a sacrifice to a demon and then eat that sacrifice, you got a pretty fair chance of partaking of that demon. Like I said, it's an anti-Eucharist. Yes. What's that?
Where was the Catholic Church then?
This is the Catholic Church then.
There's no Catholic Church then, we're all Christians.
You know,
They weren't Catholics, they were Christians.
I agree and disagree. The word Catholic was first used around the year 100 AD, shortly after this book was written. So you've got the word Catholic showing up shortly after this time, but you've got complete continuity in the community. It's not like all of a sudden these people started going, oh, we're the Catholic Church. No, there's this continuity that goes back to Jerusalem a generation or two before this. Way before the Protestant Reformation.
Catholic and all Catholic.
Correct.
Well, unless they were Orthodox or Coptic, but yes.
Catholic was universal.
That's what it means.
Catholic meant universal, exactly. And it was first used to mean, around the year 100 AD, universal. This is what the whole church believes, as opposed to some of these crazy people that are popping up within the different churches saying these crazy things. No, that's incorrect belief. This is Catholic belief, and that's how the word first started being used.
But they refer to themselves as Christians.
Yes, they refer to themselves as Christians. And they're also very soon going to start referring to themselves as Catholics. But again, it's the same communities. I'd say that's a problem that crops up among Christians everywhere, that, I think I can do whatever I want and I'll be okay. That's church number 7, by the way. We're getting there. All right, but Thyatira is loving but sinful. They love God. They love neighbor. They serve one another. But, they've got this blind spot, and it's really affecting their witness and their walk with God. How about us? We may be living a great Christian life, loving and serving one another. But do we have an area of our lives where we're not following God? Jesus calls us to trust him with every area of our lives, to live rightly, and to give that area of our life to him. All right, that's Thyatira, loving but sinful. Sardis. Sardis was a wealthy city. It's the place you went to shop for luxury goods. But wealth and good looks aren't everything. Jesus says to them, I know your works. You have the name of being alive, and you are dead. Who? In other words, you look good on the outside, but there is nothing godly on the inside. You're a social club. He calls them to wake up and strengthen what remains. He says there are only a few people in Sardis who are actually still following him. What about us? Why do we come to church? Do we come to church because we're bored? Do we come to church because we want to meet people or spend time with friends? All of those, honestly, are good reasons. But there better be something else there. Do we also come to church to seek God? Do we come to church to worship and bow down? Do we come to Mass expecting to hear from God in the readings and homily, expecting to meet with God in prayer and in the Eucharist? Jesus has a stern warning for the church at Sardis. Wake up. That's Sardis. Spiritually dead.
It sounds like a Catholic church.
You know,
Isn't it awful? I swear it is like the stereotype of the Catholic Church. I'm all in on that one. So if we're the church at Sardis today, oh man, we're in bad shape. And it's our job to help the church wake up. There's our job as Catholics in this day and age. Yes. All right, hold on. I'm gonna break this up now. I'm gonna take Scott's point and run with it. So we mentioned before. Okay,
We're not spiritually dead.
the Catholic Church. I think a lot of the stereotype of it is, I think we're Sardis. And yet, thank you, Scott, we're not all Sardis. There's a lot of life here. There's pockets that are springing back to life. There's places that have always been alive. So let's be the life promoters, shall we?
Let's go to Philly.
Let's go to Philly. Spiritually. All right. Philadelphia. Philadelphia was rocked by earthquakes and experienced hostility from the local Jewish community, but its faith was rock solid. Jesus only has words of praise and encouragement for the church at Philadelphia. He says, I know your works. You have kept my word. You have kept my name. You have patiently endured. And he makes them extravagant promises. He promises to correct them when persecution comes. He promises to give them opportunity to spread the gospel. He promises participation in the life of heaven. He promises to make them pillars in the temple of God. Hey, I want to be that church. So, what about us? Do we have any hope of being the Church of Philadelphia? Yes. Jesus' message here is incredibly freeing, especially for the perfectionists among us. It's not possible for any of us to live entirely free from sin this side of heaven. But it is possible for us to avoid deliberate sin, keep the faith, stand strong, love God, love neighbor. And that's what the church in Philadelphia is successfully doing. It is entirely possible to be living in such a way here on earth that Jesus looks at us and says, well done, good and faithful servant. He promises to them not to make life easy, but to protect them, to give them opportunities to spread the gospel, to shower blessings on them and keep them close. Sometimes Jesus really does just want to say, you're doing great. Keep it up. Keep going. I am with you. Is that a relief? Sometimes that's all we need to hear. And that's all the Church of Philadelphia needed to hear. Laodicea was situated between one city with cold mountain spring water and another city with natural hot springs. The water in Laodicea was neither hot nor cold. And Jesus says their faith is just like their drinking water. Tepid. Terminally lukewarm. Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spew you out of my mouth. Wow. Clearly we don't want to be lukewarm. So, what does it mean to be lukewarm? It means wanting to do the bare minimum to avoid hell. It means not murdering anyone. It It means living the kind of faith where you check your boxes and call yourself a Catholic. It usually involves seeing God as a rule maker who needs to be placated instead of a loving father who invites us to be his loving children. The people in Laodicea, they say to God, no, thank you. My life is going just fine. I'm okay. I don't need any more of God in my life. But Jesus says they are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. What is Jesus' message to them? I love you. Repent. Come back. Jesus even tells them how to repent. This is the only letter where he gives them specific instructions on what to do in case they've forgotten. He says they need supernatural eye ointment. They need to see their spiritual situation as it really is. To see God, their loving Father, as he really is. He says they need white garments. They need to ask forgiveness and seek holiness and purity. And finally, they need to store up treasure in heaven. Live for Jesus, not for themselves. What about us? Are we complacent? Do we think we're doing just fine when really we've never had much of a relationship with God? Or maybe we used to, but we don't anymore. For whatever reason, we've kept him at arm's length. Maybe we got mad at him and walked away. Maybe we never really came back. Or maybe we never really went there in the first place. Jesus invites us to begin again. Accept God's love and forgiveness. Put God first. Center our life around him. Seek him in prayer and worship. Grow in love. That's Laodicea. I find these last two groups interesting because they're two completely opposite groups of people in today's world. The letter to Philadelphia, in a sense, it's there to comfort the scrupulous, the people who try really hard to please God. And if you're in a class like this, there's probably quite a few of you here in the room. People who are trying really hard to please God and need to know that they are, in fact, pleasing to God. Well done. The letter to Laodicea is there to wake up the complacent. The people who are just doing their own thing, living life for themselves, and don't realize they need to find God because they haven't found him yet. So, out of the 7 churches, which one sounds like you? All of them. You know, I like that answer. I think we can see ourselves in every one of them. So, we're way late, but I'd invite you when you go home, take some personal prayer. Ask God, where am I right now? And what are you calling me to be? Sound like good homework? That, and you get to read chapters 4 through 7 of Revelation.